Robert Barrows sat in a cafe on the corner of Main Street, nervously stirring his coffee and staring out the window at the gray October sky of Iowa. Across from him sat Clyde Marlowe, his best friend since high school, who watched his friend's condition with concern. Robert looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and his suit hanging loosely, which was completely unlike the always neat and tidy medical equipment sales manager. "Clyde, I can't live like this anymore," Robert finally said, setting down his cup. "These suspicions are eating me up inside. Lynetta, I think she's cheating on me." Clyde frowned and leaned back in his chair. He had known Robert for over 20 years and had never seen him in such a state. Usually calm and level-headed, the 35-year-old man now looked like a hunted animal. "Rob, are you sure? Maybe it's just the pregnancy affecting you? You know how it is when you're expecting your first child. Nerves, anxiety." "No, it's not just nerves," Robert shook his head. "She's been acting strange for the last 4 months. She hides her phone when I walk into the room. She gets messages late at night and says they're from her coworkers. But what coworkers would text an accountant at 11 o'clock at night?" Clyde listened intently, studying his friend's face. Robert wasn't prone to drama or unfounded suspicions. If he was talking about this, then something was definitely going on. "And also," Robert continued, lowering his voice, "she's become cold. We hardly talk anymore. She used to tell me everything that was going on in her life, but now she just gives me one-word answers. And this distance didn't start with the pregnancy. It started long before that." "Have you tried talking to her directly?" "Of course I have. Several times. She denies everything, says I'm making problems out of nothing. She swears she only loves me. But I can see it, Clyde. I'm not blind." Robert ran his hand over his face, and Clyde noticed his fingers trembling. The situation was more serious than he had thought. "And the worst part is," Robert's voice grew even quieter, "I'm starting to wonder if it's my child." Clyde sat up straight. This was a very serious accusation. "Rob, do you realize what you're saying?" "I do, and it doesn't make it any easier. But think about it. If she's cheating on me, how can I be sure I'm the father? The timing fits, but that doesn't guarantee anything." Clyde was silent for a long time, thinking about what he had heard. He worked at a bank and was used to analyzing situations and weighing risks. Now he was looking at a man on the verge of a nervous breakdown. "Listen," he said finally, "you need to get to the bottom of this. You can't live in constant suspicion, especially now that you have a child on the way. Either your fears are justified or they're not. But it's better to know the truth than to be tormented by uncertainty." "How can I find out? Hire a private investigator?" "You don't have to go to such extremes right away. Try conducting your own investigation. Be careful, unobtrusive. Talk to the neighbors, maybe someone saw something. Check her phone if you get the chance." Robert nodded, determination appearing in his eyes for the first time in a long time. "You're right. I have to know the truth, whatever it is." They parted ways at the cafe, and Robert drove home through the city center. On the way, he thought about his friend's words. Clyde was right. The uncertainty was killing him slowly but surely. It was better to know the bitter truth than to continue living in agonizing doubt. As he approached his neighborhood, Robert decided to start small. Their neighbor, Seidlin Quist, worked as a nurse at a local clinic and was often home during the day. The young woman was always friendly and outgoing, and her windows faced their house. If anyone could have noticed anything, it was her. Robert parked his car and headed for Seidlin's small cottage. The 24-year-old girl opened the door almost immediately, as if she had been expecting him. She was wearing casual clothes, her hair casually tied back in a ponytail. "Hi, Robert. How are you? How's Lynetta feeling?" "Hi, Sage. Everything's fine, thanks. Lynetta is getting ready to give birth. She's nervous, of course. Listen, I don't want to bother you, but I have a question." Seidlin invited him in and offered him coffee, but Robert politely declined, saying he wouldn't stay long. "What's the matter?" she asked, sitting down in an armchair opposite him. Robert chose his words carefully. He didn't want to seem paranoid or create an awkward situation. "You see, there have been some strange things happening in our house lately. Things have been out of place, and sometimes it seems like someone has been in the house when we weren't there. Maybe I'm just nervous about the upcoming birth, but still, Have you noticed anyone coming to our house? Maybe when I wasn't home? Seidlin frowned thoughtfully. That's strange you should ask. I don't usually pay attention to my neighbors, but in the last few months I have seen a man come to your house several times. Tall, dark-skinned, about your age. Robert's heart began to beat faster. Can you describe him in more detail? Well, he usually came in the afternoon when you were definitely not home. I've seen him 3 or 4 times in the last few months. He was dressed casually, in jeans and a shirt. He walked with confidence, clearly felt at home. Oh, and he had the same car as you, only darker. Robert felt the ground slip away beneath his feet. The description could fit many people, but the detail about the car made him think of his brother James. He did have a similar model, only dark blue. This man, did he look familiar to you? Maybe you've seen him before? Seidlin thought again. You know, now that you mention it, he did look like you. Not a doppelganger, of course, but there was definitely something similar. His facial features, maybe, or the way he carried himself. At the time, I thought he might be a relative of yours. Robert struggled to remain calm. More and more details pointed to James, his younger brother. But how could that be? James had always been loyal to him. They had grown up together and supported each other through everything. Thanks, Sage. You've been a great help. Maybe it really was one of our relatives. Maybe my brother stopped by to see Lynette while I was away. Of course, Robert. If you need anything else, let me know. And give Lynette my best regards. Tell her I'm thinking of her. Robert thanked his neighbor and went out into the street. His head was spinning from the information he had received. James was at his house when he wasn't there. James, who had never mentioned his visits to Lynette. It could have been innocent. His brother could have simply been visiting his pregnant sister-in-law, especially considering how much Robert worked. But in the context of his other suspicions, these visits took on a whole new meaning. He walked slowly toward his house, trying to collect his thoughts. Could James really have betrayed him? Could his own brother be having an affair with his wife? The thought seemed absurd and painful at the same time. Robert entered the house and heard noises coming from the bedroom. Lynetta was rearranging things, preparing for the birth. The due date was approaching. The doctor had said the baby could come at any moment. "Rob, are you home?" she called from the bedroom. "Yes, it's me," he replied, climbing the stairs. Lynetta was standing by the dresser, folding baby clothes. At 30, she was a beautiful woman, tall and slim despite her pregnancy, with expressive brown eyes and short curly hair. Now she looked focused and a little tired. "How's work?" she asked without looking up from the baby clothes. "Fine. How are you feeling?" "I get tired quickly, but that's natural. The doctor says everything is going according to plan. I might go into labor this week." Robert watched his wife, trying to detect something unusual in her behavior. But Lynetta looked as usual, calm, collected, absorbed in her work. Was this woman capable of cheating on him? Could she have been seeing his brother behind his back? "Lynetta," he began cautiously. "James hasn't been in touch for a while. Maybe we should invite him over for dinner this week." His wife froze for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. "Of course, if you want. Although I'm not sure it's worth planning anything serious. I could go into labor at any moment." "He didn't come to see you when I was out?" Now Lynetta looked up at her husband. Something fleeting flashed in her eyes. Surprise, wariness, or even fear. "No, of course not. Why do you ask?" "Just a neighbor mentioned seeing a familiar man at our house. I thought maybe it was James." "I don't know who she could have seen. Maybe the mailman or a delivery man. You know how many packages we get for the baby these days." Lynetta went back to what she was doing, but Robert noticed that her movements had become more abrupt and tense. She was clearly worried, although she was trying to hide it. The rest of the evening was spent doing the usual household chores. Lynetta packed her bag for the maternity hospital, checked her documents, and made lists of necessary purchases. Robert helped her, but his mind was preoccupied with something else entirely. Sajan's words wouldn't leave his mind, and his wife's behavior only reinforced his suspicions. When Lynetta went to bed, Robert sat in the living room for a long time, thinking about what was happening. He decided that tomorrow he would talk to James directly. He was his brother, a man he had trusted all his life. If there really was something going on between James and Lynetta, Robert had to find out. Robert spent the next 3 days in a state of nervous tension that became more unbearable with each passing hour. The suspicions that had arisen after his conversation with Seidlin needed to be verified, and he decided to conduct his own investigation. On Thursday morning, when Lynetta left for her regular doctor's appointment, he had his chance to act. Robert started with the most obvious place: his wife's phone. Lynetta had left it at home, which was extremely rare. She usually never left her cell phone behind, but today she must have forgotten it in her rush. Robert's hands trembled as he picked up the familiar pink case. He knew he was violating a boundary of trust, but his need to know the truth was stronger than his moral principles. To his surprise, the phone wasn't locked with a password. Lynetta had never hidden the contents of her phone from him, at least not before. Robert opened the message list and began to carefully study the correspondence. Most of the conversations were about work, plans for the birth, and purchases for the baby. But at the very bottom of the list, he found a conversation with a contact simply labeled J. Robert's heart began to race. He opened the dialogue and saw a series of messages that made him feel sick. The correspondence had been going on for the last 5 months, and the tone of the messages was clearly intimate. "I miss you. When can we see each other?" Jay had written 3 days ago. "Rob will be late at work today. Come over at 7, Lynetta replied. "I can't wait for the moment when we can be together openly," Jay wrote again. "Everything will be resolved soon. We'll talk to him after the birth," his wife wrote. Robert read these messages, feeling the world crumble beneath his feet. His worst suspicions were confirmed in black and white. But who was this Jay? Could it really be James? He scrolled through the messages and found ones that left no doubt as to the identity of his wife's lover. "Rob asked if you came by. I think he suspects something," Lynetta wrote a month ago. In the same conversation, Robert found a reference to working on the railroad, which confirmed his suspicions. Jay was James, his own brother. It got even worse. In the messages, they discussed the child's paternity. "Are you sure it's yours?" Lynetta asked. "The timing is right. It's definitely my son. What if Robert demands a paternity test? We'll deal with that when it comes up. The main thing now is that the baby is born healthy." Robert threw his phone away, unable to read any further. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely hold his glass of water. The betrayal was complete. The wife he loved and the brother he had trusted his entire life had been deceiving him for months. And now he had learned that the child he had been eagerly awaiting was most likely not his. Robert tried to collect his thoughts. He had to act rationally, not give in to his emotions. He took photos of the most compromising messages, then deleted the browsing history and put the phone back in its place. He spent the next 2 hours searching for other evidence. In the bedroom, in the drawer of Lynetta's bedside table, he found receipts from restaurants where he and his wife had never been. The bills were for 2 people, and the dates matched the days when he had worked late. In the closet, he found new lingerie that Lynetta had never worn in front of him. Each piece of evidence he found hit him like a hammer blow. The woman he had planned to spend his whole life with, whom he trusted unconditionally, had been systematically cheating on him. And his brother, the man who was closest to him in the world, had betrayed him in the most despicable way. By noon, Robert couldn't stay at home any longer. Lynetta was due back in an hour, and he wasn't ready to look her in the eye and pretend he knew nothing. He got in his car and drove to the train depot where James worked. The drive to the depot took 20 minutes, but to Robert, it seemed like an eternity. He rehearsed the conversation with his brother, trying to find the words that would make him confess. But how could he ask about such betrayal? How could he start a conversation that could destroy their relationship forever? James worked in the mechanical workshop, repairing locomotives. Robert found him under one of the trains, where he was fixing something in the engine. The 32-year-old man looked like his older brother, but he was more heavily built, with hands covered in calluses from hard work. When he saw Robert, he climbed out from under the train in surprise. "Rob, what are you doing here? Did something happen to Lynetta?" "No, she's fine. I need to talk to you. Alone." James wiped his hands on a rag and glanced at his colleagues. "It's lunch break now. Let's go to my car." They walked to the parking lot near the depot. James took out his cigarettes and offered one to his brother, but he refused. Robert took a few minutes to collect his thoughts, not knowing how to start the conversation. James, I want to ask you something very important, and I want you to answer honestly. Of course, Rob, what is it? Are you having an affair with my wife? The question came out sharply, almost aggressively. James choked on his smoke and coughed. What? Rob, are you out of your mind? I'm asking you seriously. Are you having an affair with Lynetta? James threw down his cigarette and turned to face his brother. His eyes were filled with genuine indignation. Robert, how can you ask me that? Lynetta is your wife. She's like a sister to me. We can't have a relationship. Then explain to me why the neighbors saw you at my house when I wasn't there. James was taken aback for a moment but quickly recovered. I did visit you a few times. Lynetta asked me to help prepare the nursery. You know how much you work, and it's hard for her to do everything herself in the last months of pregnancy. And why didn't you tell me about it? Why should I? I thought it was nothing. I brought some paint and helped move the furniture. Is that something you need to report? Robert studied his brother's face closely, trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. James looked genuinely upset by the suspicion, but Robert already knew what he had seen on his wife's phone. James, do you swear that there is nothing between you and Lynetta other than a family relationship? I swear on everything that's holy. Rob, I understand that this is a difficult time for you. The baby is coming soon, you're nervous and worried. But how can you suspect me of such a thing? I'm your brother. James put his hand on Robert's shoulder and looked him straight in the eye. I would never betray you, never. You know what you mean to me. After our parents died, we were all we had. Robert felt terrible. Either James was an excellent actor or he really wasn't having an affair with Lynetta. But then how could he explain the messages on his phone? Maybe Jay was someone else entirely. I'm sorry, James, he finally said. I'm really on edge. For the last few weeks, I've been tormented by suspicions that Lynetta is cheating on me, and I've started to suspect everyone. It's okay, brother. I understand. But believe me, if Lynetta had someone else, I would have told you. I couldn't stand to see you being deceived. They talked for a few more minutes about the upcoming birth, work, and plans for the future. James invited his brother to dinner over the weekend and offered to help with shopping for the baby. He behaved completely naturally, like a loving brother and future uncle. Robert left the depot in a state of confusion. On the one hand, James seemed sincere in his assurances. On the other hand, the messages on Lynetta's phone couldn't have been made up. So his wife really did have a lover, but it wasn't James. But then, who was this mysterious Jay? Instead of going home, Robert headed back to Seidlin's house. He needed time to think things over, and he wasn't ready to see Lynetta yet. He didn't know how to act around his wife, knowing she had cheated on him but unable to accuse her openly. Sage met him with surprise. She had just returned from work and was changing out of her medical uniform. Robert? Is something wrong again? Sage, I'm sorry to bother you. I just don't feel like going home right now. Can I stay with you for a while? She looked at him intently and, realizing that it was serious, invited him in. Of course, come in. Would you like some coffee or something stronger? Coffee would be great. They sat down in a small, cozy living room. Sage made coffee and got some cookies, but Robert barely touched the treats. What's going on, Robert? You look terrible. Remember yesterday when I asked you about the man you saw at our house? Of course. You said he looked like me. Try to remember more details. Maybe there are some distinctive features that could help identify him? Seidlin frowned and concentrated. Well, he was about your height, maybe a little shorter. He was more solidly built than you. Short hair, and yes, he had a scar on his right arm, quite noticeable. I saw it when he opened the car door. Robert tensed. James did have a scar on his right arm, a remnant of a childhood accident. So the neighbor had seen his brother after all. Sage, are you sure you saw him? Maybe you were mistaken? No, I remember clearly. I saw this man several times. He always came when you weren't home and stayed for 2 or 3 hours. He acted very confident, clearly knew where everything was. Every word Sage said hit Robert like a slap in the face. So James had lied to him right to his face. His own brother had not only cheated on his wife, but also lied to him while looking him straight in the eye. Robert, what's wrong? You're as white as a sheet. This man, is my brother James, and today I found out that he's having an affair with my wife." Seidlin gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God. Robert, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "It's not your fault. You were just answering my questions." Robert took out his phone and showed Seidlin the photos of the messages. "I checked Linetta's phone this morning. This is what I found." Seidlin read a few messages, her face expressing sympathy and outrage at the same time. "That's terrible, Robert. How could they do that to you?" "I don't know. I spoke to James an hour ago, and he denied everything. He swore there was nothing between them. Now I realize he was lying to my face." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." Robert ran his hands over his face. "Linetta is about to give birth. Maybe it's not even my child. How can I live with that knowledge? How can I look her in the eye, knowing that she betrayed me with my own brother?" Seidlin moved closer to him and put her hand on his shoulder. "Listen, I understand how hard this is for you right now, but you have to make a decision. Either you forgive them and try to repair the relationship, or what? Leave my pregnant wife? Give up a child who could be mine? I don't know the right answer. It's your life, your decision. But you can't live in constant suspicion and hatred either." Robert sat with Seidlin for another half hour, but the conversation brought him no relief. The young woman tried to support him and offered practical advice, but the problem seemed unsolvable. Around 7 in the evening, Robert realized he couldn't put off going home any longer. He thanked Seidlin for her support and drove home. Linetta was waiting for him at home. She was preparing dinner and looked calm and content. When she saw her husband, she smiled. "Hello, dear. How was work? I was worried when I couldn't get through to you." "Everything's fine. Just a lot to do." Robert tried to act natural, but he felt that his wife would definitely notice the change in his behavior. Every word she said, every glance she gave him, was now perceived through the prism of deception. At dinner, Linetta talked about her visit to the doctor and how she could go into labor any day now. She talked about the future, how they would raise their child, what their plans were for the next year. And all the while, Robert thought about how the child might not be his at all, but his own brother's. After dinner, Linetta went to take a bath, and Robert went out into the garden and called Clyde. "Hey, Rob, how's it going? Did you figure out what we talked about?" "Clyde, it's even worse than I thought." Robert's voice trembled. "She's really cheating on me, and the worst part is, it's with my brother." "What? Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I saw their messages, and the neighbors confirmed that James regularly came to our house when I wasn't home. And today, when I asked him directly, he denied everything. He lied to my face. Oh my God, Rob. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say." "And you know what's worst? In their messages, they discuss that the baby is most likely James's. So I'm expecting someone else's child." Clyde was silent for a long time, thinking about what he had heard. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I have no idea. I can't make a scene now when she's in the last stages of pregnancy. On the other hand, how can I go on living as if nothing has happened? Maybe you should wait until the baby is born and then sort things out? How am I going to look at this child? Every time I see him, will I wonder if he's mine? And how am I going to talk to James, knowing that he betrayed me?" "Rob, you need to calm down. I understand that you feel like your world is falling apart, but you need to act sensibly." "Sensibly?" Robert's voice rose. "Clyde, I've been betrayed by the two people closest to me, the woman I loved and the brother I trusted with my life. How can I act sensibly? I understand your pain, but think about the consequences. If you destroy everything now, you'll lose your wife, your child, and your brother. Maybe it's worth trying to fix things. Fix them? How can you fix such betrayal?" Robert felt anger and despair fighting inside him. He wanted to scream, to hit something, but at the same time he knew that any rash action would only make things worse. "Clyde, I feel terrible. I don't know how I can go on knowing this. Rob, where are you?" "At home, in the garden. Linetta's in the bathroom. Listen, maybe you shouldn't stay at home tonight. Come over to my place and spend the night. We'll think about it with a clear head in the morning." "No, I can't. If I leave the house now, she'll realize something's wrong, and I'm not ready to talk about it yet." Then try to get to bed early tonight. Take something to calm you down. We'll meet tomorrow and discuss everything. Okay, thanks for listening. Rob, hang in there. We'll find a way out of this. Robert ended the conversation and stood in the garden for a long time, looking at the stars. It seemed to him that his life had been divided into before and after that day. In the morning, he was just a man who suspected his wife of infidelity. Now he knew he was the victim of a double betrayal, and he couldn't imagine how to live with that knowledge. On Saturday morning, around 6:30, Robert woke up to strange noises coming from the bedroom. Lynetta was moaning softly, clutching her stomach. He knew instantly that she was in labor. "Rob, I think this is it," she whispered when she saw that her husband was awake. "The pain started an hour ago, but I didn't want to wake you. Now the contractions are regular." Despite all his suspicions and worries of the past few days, Robert instantly switched into action mode. Whatever their relationship was, the most important thing now was the well-being of his wife and child. "How long between contractions?" he asked, quickly getting dressed. "About 7 minutes. Dr. Harris said that when the interval shortens to 5 minutes, we should go to the hospital." Robert helped Lynette out of bed and led her to the bathroom. Then he brought the bag he had packed earlier and loaded it into the car. Lynette moved slowly, stopping every time a new wave of pain hit her. "Everything will be fine," Robert said, helping his wife down the stairs. "We'll make it to the hospital in time. The doctors know what they're doing." By 8 o'clock in the morning, the contractions were coming every 5 minutes, and they left for St. Mary's Hospital. The drive to the medical center usually took 20 minutes, but on Saturday morning, the traffic was light, and they got there in 15 minutes. In the emergency room, they were met by the nurse on duty, who quickly filled out the paperwork and took Lynetta to the maternity ward. Robert remained in the waiting area on the first floor of the building. There were soft chairs, coffee and juice machines, and stacks of magazines on the tables. "Labor can last several hours, especially if it's your first child," the nurse explained. "We will keep you informed of the progress. Don't worry, your wife will be fine." Robert tried to read the magazines, drank coffee from the vending machine, and paced the hallway, but his thoughts kept returning to the events of the last few days. He knew that the child who was about to be born might not be his. He knew that the woman who was now in labor had been cheating on him with his own brother for months, but at the same time, he couldn't help but worry about her well-being. Around noon, the same nurse approached him. "Mr. Barrows, your wife is in active labor. Everything is going well, but it will take a few more hours. Can I see her?" "Not yet, but as soon as the baby is born, we will call you right away." Robert nodded and returned to waiting. Other husbands and relatives of women in labor appeared periodically in the hallway. Some smoked nervously outside. Others talked on the phone, relaying the news to their loved ones. Robert felt detached from the commotion. He couldn't share the joy of others, knowing what he knew. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the nurse approached him again, this time with a smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Barrows. You have a son. He is healthy and weighs 3 kilograms, 400 grams. The mother is feeling well." Robert felt a strange mixture of joy and bitterness. The baby was born healthy. That was the main thing. But whose baby was it? "When can I see them?" "In an hour and a half. The doctors are performing the necessary procedures, and then the mother and baby will be transferred to the postpartum ward on the 4th floor. Robert thanked the nurse and called Clyde to share the news. "Rob, congratulations! How's Lynetta? How's the baby?" "Everything's fine. It's a boy, healthy. They're transferring them to the ward now." "That's wonderful! I'm so happy for you." Robert didn't want to spoil his friend's mood with his doubts about fatherhood. This wasn't the kind of conversation you had on the phone in a hospital corridor. "Thanks, Clyde. We'll talk later when I get home." "Sure. Give Lynetta my congratulations. And get some rest, new dad." At 4:30, the nurse took Robert to the 4th floor, to the postpartum ward. It was a long corridor with white walls, lots of doors leading to rooms, and the smell of disinfectant. Room 407 was at the end of the corridor, next to a window overlooking the hospital parking lot. Lynetta was lying in bed, looking tired but happy. Next to her, in a transparent crib, a baby wrapped in a blue blanket was sleeping. "Hi," she said quietly when Robert entered the room. "Meet your son." Robert approached the crib and looked at the baby. The little one was asleep, his tiny fists clenched, his breathing even and calm. In those first hours of life, it was impossible to tell who he looked like, but Robert couldn't help wondering if there was anything of James in those features. "He's beautiful," Robert said, not knowing what else to say in such a situation. "The doctor says everything is fine. The delivery went smoothly." "How are you feeling?" "Tired but happy. Rob, we're parents." Lynetta reached out to her husband, and he mechanically took her hand in his. But inside he was numb. This woman had been cheating on him for months, seeing his brother, possibly giving birth to his child. And now she was talking about happiness, as if nothing had happened. "I want to name him Marcus, after your grandfather," Lynetta continued. "What do you think?" "It's a nice name," Robert agreed. They talked for a few more minutes about the baby and how they would arrange their life with him. Lynetta was excited, making plans, while Robert responded in monosyllables, fighting the urge to say everything that was on his mind. "You need to rest," he said finally. "I'll sit in the hallway for a while, then go home and get my things." "Okay. Did you call James?" He was waiting for news about his nephew. At the mention of his brother's name, Robert felt his jaw tighten. "Not yet. I'll call him later." He left the room and sat down on a bench in the hallway. The ward was quiet, with only the occasional sound of nurses' footsteps or babies crying in neighboring rooms. Robert tried to collect his thoughts and emotions. The baby was born, and now he had to decide what to do next. Around 6 in the evening, he heard familiar footsteps in the hallway. Turning around, he saw James walking toward him with a bouquet of flowers and a box of chocolates. "Rob, congratulations!" James smiled broadly, walked over and hugged his brother. "How are you? How's Lynetta? How's my nephew?" Robert felt a wave of rage rising inside him. This man, his own brother, had been deceiving him for months, sleeping with his wife, and now he was playing the role of a loving uncle. "Nephew?" Robert asked coldly, pulling away from the embrace. James noticed his brother's strange reaction. "Something wrong, Rob? You seem gloomy for a new father." "Let's go to the window," Robert said. "I need to talk to you." They walked over to the large window at the end of the hallway, which overlooked the hospital parking lot. Robert turned to face his brother, his eyes burning with anger. "Stop pretending, James. I know everything." "What are you talking about, Rob?" "About your relationship with my wife. About how you've been coming to our house for months when I wasn't there. About how you lied to my face when I asked you." James's face turned pale, but he still tried to deny it. "Rob, you've got it all wrong." "I saw your messages," Robert hissed. "Your messages on her phone. I miss you. When will we see each other? He's definitely my son." "All your words." James realized that denial was useless. His shoulders slumped. "Rob, I didn't want you to find out this way." "You didn't want me to? How did you want me to find out? By lying to me for the rest of my life? We were going to tell you after the birth." "Tell me what? That my brother betrayed me? That the woman I loved gave birth to someone else's child?" "Rob, I understand you're angry, but—" "Angry?" Robert's voice trembled with rage. "You ruined my life. You and her ruined everything." Robert grabbed his brother by the shirt. "And this child, he's yours, isn't he? Your son, not mine." James couldn't meet his brother's eyes. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "Most likely, yes. The timing fits." Those words were the last straw. Robert felt something snap in his head. All the anger, pain, and betrayal he had been holding back came pouring out at once. He grabbed James by the collar and pushed him hard against the window. "You betrayed me. You ruined my life. Rob, stop. Let's talk calmly." But Robert was no longer in control of himself. Rage clouded his eyes. He pushed his brother again, even harder. James tried to keep his balance but stumbled on the windowsill. The window was old, with a simple latch, and easily swung open under the weight of the man's body. "Rob, no!" James shouted, trying to grab the frame. But it was too late. Robert gave him one last push, and James fell from the 4th floor. His scream was cut short a few seconds later by a dull thud. Robert stood by the open window, breathing heavily. Only now did he begin to understand what had happened. Down below on the asphalt of the parking lot lay the motionless body of his brother. The corridor was quiet. No one had seen what happened. All the wards were closed and the nurses were at the other end of the department. Robert quickly closed the window and headed for the elevator. The descent to the first floor seemed to take forever. In the elevator, he tried to tidy up his clothes and hair and pull himself together. He had to look natural. Leaving the hospital, he headed for the place where James lay. His brother's body was mangled from the fall, blood slowly spreading across the asphalt. Robert crouched down beside him and checked his pulse, even though he knew it was pointless. James was dead. What happened? A hospital security guard who had heard the sound of the fall ran up to him. I don't know, Robert replied, pretending to be in shock. I just came out of the hospital and saw him here. It looks like he fell out of a window. Do you know him? He's my brother. He came to visit my wife, who just gave birth. The guard called an ambulance and the police. 10 minutes later, the parking lot was filled with emergency vehicles. Robert answered the police officer's questions, pretending to be a distraught relative. He said that James had gone up to the 4th floor, and after a while, he heard a loud thud. Perhaps he felt ill and lost consciousness by the open window, suggested the investigator. We will examine the scene, but so far everything points to an accident. Robert nodded, agreeing with the police's version of events. He was torn between feelings of relief that James would no longer be able to ruin his life and horror at the realization that he had killed his own brother. When the police finished their initial investigation, Robert said he wanted to return to his wife to tell her the tragic news. The investigator allowed him to go up to the ward, asking him to remain available for further questions. Robert headed for his car. In the glove compartment was a gun, a small revolver he had bought a year ago for self-defense, and for which he had a license to carry. He took the gun, hid it under his jacket, and went back to the hospital. In the elevator on its way up to the 4th floor, Robert thought about how his life was now ruined. His brother was dead, killed by his own hand. His wife had betrayed him in the most despicable way. The child he had been expecting turned out to be someone else's. He had nothing left to live for. The 4th floor corridor was empty. The nurses had apparently gathered in the doctor's office to discuss the incident with the fall from the window. Robert quietly opened the door to room 407. Lynetta was lying in bed, the baby sleeping in a crib nearby. Hearing footsteps, she turned her head. Rob? What was that noise outside? I heard sirens. Robert closed the door behind him and turned to his wife. Lynetta, I have something to tell you. What happened? You look strange. James is dead. He fell out of the window. Lynetta sat up abruptly in bed. What? How did that happen? He confessed everything to me, about your relationship, about being the father of the child. Lynetta's face turned pale. Rob, I can explain everything. Explain? Robert pulled out a gun. How can you explain betraying me with my own brother? Rob, what are you doing? Put the gun away. You ruined my life, Lynetta. You and James destroyed everything I had. Please think about the baby. He didn't do anything wrong. That baby isn't mine. You confirmed it yourself. Lynetta tried to get out of bed, but she was still weak from giving birth. Rob, please, let's talk. I know I did something wrong, but we can fix everything. Fix? How can you fix months of lying to me? How can you fix giving birth to someone else's child? I love you, Rob, I always have. What happened with James? It was a mistake. A mistake that lasted 6 months? Robert raised the gun and pointed it at his wife. Lynetta closed her eyes and pressed her hands to her chest. Rob, no! The shot rang out in the silence of the room. Lynetta fell back onto the pillows, her eyes wide open, a red stain spreading across her chest. She stared at her husband for a few more seconds, her lips moving silently, then fell still. Robert lowered the gun and looked at the cradle. The baby continued to sleep, undisturbed by the shot. Small and defenseless, he was not to blame for anything, but every time Robert looked at him, he would remember the betrayal. Robert left the room, closed the door, and sat down on a bench in the hallway. He placed the gun next to him. In a few minutes, the nurses would discover Lynetta's body, there would be a commotion, and the police would arrive. He would be arrested, tried, and sentenced. But now, sitting in the silence of the hospital corridor, Robert could only think that his life was over. Everything he had lived for, his family, his love, his future, had been destroyed by the betrayal of those closest to him. And now he himself had become a murderer, and there was no way back.